Hello, my name's Zahir and welcome to my channel Plants and Paints, where today we're going to be talking about the Philodendron Micans. So we're going to start with a little introduction into the plant. So we're going to talk a little bit about its origin and some other facts about the plant. So firstly, I want to make it clear that this plant has recently, I'm not sure exactly how recently, but it's recently been renamed. So it's been given a new scientific name, which is Philodendron Hedaraceum. Now, I'm going to refer to the plant as the Philodendron Micans for the fact that most people will still, I'm imagining, still be referring to it as the Philodendron Micans. So I will chuck in the odd Hedaraceum here and there just for the sake of the people who have adapted to that changed name, but I will generally refer to this plant throughout the video as the Philodendron Micans. Okay, so the Philodendron Micans or Hedaraceum can be found natively growing in Central and South America as well as the Caribbean. So it's a species of flowering plant from the Hederaceae family and is an evergreen hemipathitic climbing plant. Now this plant can actually reach anywhere from 10 to 20 feet in length, which is, it's quite a huge plant. I'd imagine in its natural environment you're going to find it spiraling around trees and, going up towards the canopy. So as I said, it can get anywhere from 10 to 20 feet in height, and the leaves themselves, the heart-shaped leaves of the Philodendron Micans, can actually get to up to 30 centimeters in length as well. So again, quite a significant leaf. And I'm sure that everyone who buys this plant buys it for the foliage of the plant. I'm quite a big philodendron collector myself. I think quite a few of my videos so far have been about philodendrons. I do have quite a lot in my collection, and it's the foliage of the philodendrons that actually attracts me to them as well. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a flowering plant, but flowering generally in this plant will only occur with a mature plant. So you're looking at something significantly bigger than what I have here. You're going to have to excuse the extra plant in the pot here. This is a pot from my green wall, and in some of my pots I've got two plants growing, and this happens to be another plant in amongst my Philodendron Micans in here. So today the plant we're going to be talking about is actually this one here, so I don't want you to get confused between the two. So the Philodendron Micans is actually this plant here. So as I mentioned earlier, it's a flowering plant, and generally the only time this plant is going to flower is when the plant is quite a mature plant. So I've never actually come across a video or seen pictures of anyone who's actually keeping one as part of a houseplant collection where it's actually got flowers on it. So if you were lucky enough to have that in your collection and you do have a mature one and it is flowering, then you'll know what the flowers look like. But generally it produces spades of white flowers. But from the information I've read, they are quite insignificant. So what I would imagine it means by that is they're quite small, and they're not really something that's going to catch your eye too easily. So it is a flowering plant, but it's not likely that within the plant hobby you're actually going to get to see those flowers unless you've had it for quite a significant amount of time. I mean, I've had this since winter and it's now August, so coming up to, well, it's well over half a year. When I got it, it probably was about the length of my hand, and now it's, if I was to straighten these branches out, it probably reaches about 6 foot in length quite easily. Actually, I would imagine that is 6 foot. So in the time it's become 6 foot, my leaves have pretty much stayed at about 10 to 12 centimeters in length as well. So I would imagine it takes quite long for it to become significant enough for it to produce flowers. So the philodendron itself is quite a popular plant within the plant hobby, and due to the fact that it's quite widely spread in nature, so Central to South America and the Caribbean as well. It's quite readily available in the hobby, although you're not going to find it in places like garden centers and things like that. I've never actually come across it in a garden center. It's something that you'll actually have to physically type up on the internet and find a seller, but it's not something that you should have too much difficulty being able to add to your collection. So yeah, if it's something that you want, just and you don't have one in your collection, you can just quite easily type in Philodendron Micans for sale or Philodendron Hedaraceum for sale and on Google, and you more than likely are going to be able to find something or someone selling the plant or cuttings of the plant as well. So I've given you a general introduction into the plant now. I hope it's significant enough. If there's anything that I've missed that you want me to talk about in a bit more detail, then please, you know, add that to the comments, and I'm quite happy to reply to your comments in as much detail as you want. So what we're going to do now is we're going to move on to the general care and maintenance of this plant. I think what we'll do is we'll start with the lighting, because, you know, you get a new plant, you put it somewhere, and I'd imagine one of the first thoughts that come to your head is that, is this plant getting enough light where I'm going to put it? Because watering and everything, I would imagine that comes second nature. Lighting is sort of a trial and error thing, so I want to try and, you know, take as much of the guesswork out of that as possible for you. So this particular plant, as far as lighting is concerned, for best results, what you actually want to do is you want to provide it a moderate lighting condition. So bright indirect light is actually best for this plant, although this plant will tolerate most lighting conditions. This is a very easy to grow and very forgiving plant, hence the reason I said at the beginning of the video that it is good for all levels of plant keeper. So when I first received this plant, I kept it in a hanging plant pot in my north facing window, and it lived there for about 4 months. It was quite happy there. The growth was a little bit slow, but, you know, the plant didn't show no adverse effects to being, you know, quite in quite a brightly lit area. So after about 4 months, I moved it onto my green wall, which is just there behind me. You can probably see some of the plants dangling down in the background there, and that is more of an indirect light situation where it seems to constantly be in the shade, but it's receiving a significant amount of light. And since I put it there a couple of months ago now, I would imagine it's doubled, if not almost tripled in size. So it's grown significantly there, and it seems a lot happier as well. So as I mentioned, it will tolerate a bright lighting condition. I don't know so much about being in direct sunlight, because I would imagine that will burn the leaves, because they are a velvet feeling leaf, which means that they will actually end up getting burned by too much direct sun. But, you know, like a north facing window, hanging in the window should be fine. But you can also move this back into your room. As long as it's getting an amount of light, it will survive and it will continue to grow. But if you want it to thrive, then obviously provide it a indirect but bright light. Okay, so I think I've covered the lighting there. So what we're actually going to do now is we're going to talk a little bit about the potting mix. Now, with philodendrons in general, what you're going to find most of the time is most philodendrons, they require a very well draining, quite aerated soil. Now, when I received this plant initially, that is the kind of substrate it arrived to me, and it was very well draining. You know, it was well aerated soil, it was very light. But even for such a small and insignificant plant, it was drinking so quickly that I was having to keep an eye on this more than, you know, most of my other plants. And I was finding that if I missed watering it a day past or 2 days past a point where it actually started to need water, it would start sulking, and when it sulks the leaves start to crumple up a bit, and then when you rehydrate it, some of those crumples don't actually come out of the leaves. I don't know if you'll be able to see it there, but there are crumples in some of my leaves here from the early part of the growth of this plant due to that. So I was watering it every 3 days on average, and for quite a small plant that is, you know, quite a significant amount of watering. So it is quite a thirsty plant. So I came to the conclusion that the potting mix, although in general you'll find a lot of information which I think is quite a generic information that people are picking up from keeping other types of philodendrons, and they're giving the same information for this, saying to follow that sort of potting mix. But I've found that my potting mix that I've started to use since repotting it is actually working for this plant a lot better. So what I've actually used for my own potting mix is 40% orchid bark potting mix. I've used 20% perlite, and I've used 40% of a fertile, well draining, good quality potting soil. So 40, 40, 20, they're the ratios that I've potted this up in. And it's created quite a thick but still aerated soil. So all it's actually doing now, different to what it did before, is it's holding that moisture for that little bit longer, where I was having to water that in a 10 centimeter pot every 3 days with it having only 2 little cuttings in there. I'm now, with a significant plant of, you know, over 6 foot in length, I'm actually now watering this, you know, once a week to every 10 days, just due to the fact that the potting medium is holding the moisture in for that much longer. Now obviously I'm not suggesting for you to leave it soggy. All I'm suggesting is that that potting mix will leave it damp for longer, so the water in the potting mix won't evaporate so quickly, because obviously the plant's going to drink however much it's going to drink, and if you've got a very light aerated soil, you're going to get a lot of evaporation as well. So just making it that little bit more denser means that, you know, you're not having to water so frequently, and also I've benefited in my plant's health from doing that. I mean, I'm sure you can agree, my philodendron, he looks very happy. He's not usually tangled up like this. I usually have all of his branches spaced out. I've just done that for the purpose of the video, otherwise it would be off the table and you won't be able to pretty much see most of it. So, you know, hello boy, my cat's having a little moan. So but basically, based on what you might see on the internet, you know, don't feel angry if I've said to do something other than what most people tell you to do. I would still suggest to follow my potting mix, due to the fact that my plant has shown a positive reaction to me actually doing that. So I've talked, I think, quite significantly there about potting mix. So what we're going to do now, hello, is move on to watering. So the Philodendron Micans, or the Philodendron Hedaraceum, I did say I'm going to mention both names in the video. As mentioned in the potting mix section, does like a fairly moist environment, so try to only let the soil dry about 1 to 2 inches into the potting medium. Now that is dependent on the size of the pot that you're using. So I'm imagining my plant pot here probably is about 12 to 15 centimeters deep. So I generally will let this dry up to 2 inches down into the soil, maybe 1.5 inches before I give it a water. And what I will do, I will water it little and often, so that I can make sure that it's retaining the moisture. Now that little and often for me has turned into on a weekly basis, because some of my plants I'm not having to water for a fortnight that are on my green wall, because they're drinking it far less quickly, because as I mentioned, this is quite a thirsty plant. It drinks quite a lot of water. So what you want to do is you want to use filtered water as well, or rainwater. Don't use water from your tap, because the chlorine and the other chemicals that are in the water, or you know, contaminants that are in the water, are actually going to burn the roots, and also the plant's going to take it up into the actual body of the plant, and it's going to end up in the leaves, and it's going to end up burning the tips of the leaves, and things like that are irreversible. You can't take that out from the plant afterwards. All you can do is keep feeding it fresh water and hoping for the best. So make sure that you're using filtered or rainwater. Now, whichever water you're using, make sure that you leave that water to get to room temperature. So I use filtered water for all of my plants, and generally what I will do with my filtered water is I will prepare that water 24 hours before, and then that gives the water the opportunity to have any extra contaminants that are in the water evaporate that the filter hasn't managed to take out. I think that's more paranoia on my behalf. I do want to make sure I'm giving my plants as good a water quality as possible, and leave it to get to room temperature. So I leave mine for 24 hours, and then the next day I will use the water I filtered the day before. And same with the rainwater, you want to leave that to get up to room temperature before you use that, if you decide to use rainwater. So I think I've covered watering there. There's, you know, not much information to give you about watering, and I think I'm going to move on to humidity now. So based on the fact that this plant is from Central and South America and from the Caribbean, you can imagine it's living in quite a hot and humid environment, and it can be found growing natively in the rainforests and the forests of these places. So you can imagine the humidity is really quite in the high margins. So it does benefit hugely from having a humid environment replicated for itself. So if you have a humidifier at home, it will benefit from being quite close to the humidifier. And mine's probably about 10 meters or 10 foot away from my humidifier, but I've got quite a small living room, and you know, my humidifier makes my whole house look like a tropical rainforest. So you know, I could literally put this plant anywhere in my living room and it will get enough humidity from my humidifier, which is running 24 hours a day. I never ever switch it off, no matter what the weather's like. I keep the humidity as high as possible, due to the fact that most of my plants are rainforest plants. So other things you can do to raise your humidity if you don't have a humidifier, or you want to add to that humidity, is you can spray the plants. So you can spray them with a mister, so you can mist your plants on a regular basis. I actually mist this plant every day. Other things you can do is, you can, if you've got your plant in a pot, you can put the drip tray that it's in, you can cover the bottom of that with a layer of pebbles, and you can half fill that drip tray with water, and that water will naturally evaporate around the plant. Other things you can do is you can put little water bottles, little water vessels around where you keep your plants, and that will also evaporate. Another thing you can do, which is a pretty nifty trick that I actually learnt from the Tropical Plant Addict, which is another YouTube plant video maker, is that you can put shells, the kind of shells you get at the beach, you can just scatter them around the top of your soil mix, and when you're watering your plant, that will naturally collect little reservoirs of water, and that will create a natural humidity around the base area of your plant, which I think is quite a nifty little trick. So there are ways for you to be able to raise your humidity as well. I think I've talked about humidity there also in enough detail. So what we're going to do lastly is we're going to talk about fertilizer. Now, because this plant's growth pattern is quite a quick growth pattern during the growing season, it does need significant amount of fertilizer. Now, by significant, I don't mean to, you know, give it tons and tons of fertilizer. What I actually mean by that is, what I do is, with my fertilizer, for every litre it says add 10 mil. So I will add 5 mil, but what I will do is I will fertilize this plant 3 times out of every 4 waterings. So particularly during the growing season, I would say stick to that kind of regime. Now, if you've got a natural fertilizer, so you know, a non-chemical based fertilizer, or you know, just generally a naturally derived fertilizer, then you can actually fertilize that at the ratio that it says to you, because it won't be damaging to the plant. But if you're using, you know, types of fertilizers that have got additives in them and stuff like that, then sort of stick to the ratios I'm telling you, because I do that as well, because I like to try and balance the NPK to the specifics of the plant. So during the summer period, so during the growing period from spring on through to late summer, I will fertilize every 3 out of 4 waterings, and then as it starts getting towards the winter, what I would suggest to you is start bringing that down, so that when you're deep in winter, you're down to 1 fertilizer per 4 waterings, and then as the spring starts kicking in again, you start raising that back up to the 3 out of every 4 waterings. So I think I've covered pretty much everything there with the plant. I hope that there's been enough information for you. What I'm going to do just before I finish the video is I'm going to talk a little bit about the leaves, because I think these leaves are absolutely stunning. It's the one thing that actually attracted me to this plant. Now, the Philodendron Micans, or the Philodendron Hedaraceum, actually comes in a couple of different varieties. Now, generally I would suggest they all look glossy, but you've got the velvet touch, the ones that feel velvety to the touch, and they've got quite a sheen to them as well. And when you move the leaves around, they've got a little bit of a purple undertone. And this is my preferred version of the Philodendron Micans. And also on the underneath of the leaf, you've got the quite burgundy red color there. And the other variety of the Philodendron Micans just isn't velvety. It's like your standard sort of plant leaf, but it will be quite glossy in appearance, so really quite shiny to look at. Very, very beautiful leaves. I mean, you know, to see them in person, you would actually know what I'm talking about. You know, the iridescence on them is really quite stunning. And on my green wall, this is one out of 3 of my favorite plants in my green wall, and I particularly chose this plant to go into my green wall because of how much I like it. So I've talked about a little bit about what my particular interest in this plant is. So I'm going to end the video there. I hope you've all enjoyed my video today. If you have, please don't forget to give it a thumbs up. If you're new to my channel, please don't forget to subscribe and hit the bell icon so that you can receive notifications for future content. Don't forget to leave any comments at the bottom. I do love reading through your comments when you leave them. I like responding to them. If you have any questions, or if you feel I've missed anything out, then please, like I said, leave that in the comments so that I have something to respond to. The reason I did the video on the Philodendron Micans today is because I do votes on my Instagram channel basically almost every week, and I let my subscribers choose which plant they want to learn about for that particular week, and this week the Philodendron Micans won the vote. Sorry my video's been a bit later than usual, because I actually went away on a little family holiday for a week, and then when I got back I had to start getting everything ready for the kids to go back to school and for myself to go back to work and so on and so forth. But I did get round to it in the end, and everything after this should fall back into my normal routine of putting videos up every week. Like I said, I hope you've enjoyed the video. Please don't forget to subscribe, like and leave a comment. If you're not aware of my Instagram account, then it's also called plants_and_paints. I'm going to try and leave a link for that in the description for this video, although I've never tried to do that before. If I don't manage to get it done this time, I will have figured it out by the time I do my next video. So if you haven't been through to my Instagram page, please go over to there and have a look, and you can see my whole collection of plants there. So My name's Zahir, this is Plants and Paints. I hope you enjoyed my video, and I'll see you again next week. Take care, bye bye.